Rambo, First Blood Part 2 wasn't just an action sequel. It was a cultural detonation, rewriting the rules of 1980s blockbuster cinema. Explosions lit up jungles, egos clashed behind the cameras, and Hollywood collided with Cold War politics. What audiences saw was Sylvester Stallone firing explosive arrows. What they didn't see? Real-life injuries, studio battles, government interference, and a production teetering on chaos. Today, we're revealing 20 weird facts about Rambo, First Blood Part 2 that most fans have never heard. And wait until you hear the bonus fact, a secret so bizarre it blurs the line between propaganda and cinema. Lock and load, let's dive in. 1. James Cameron wrote the first draft. Before Stallone took creative control, James Cameron, yes, the future director of Titanic and Terminator 2, wrote the initial script. Cameron envisioned a more grounded war thriller with two Rambos teaming up. The second Rambo? A wisecracking sidekick meant to balance Stallone's intensity. Stallone reportedly loved Cameron's action beats, but scrapped the idea of Rambo 2 entirely. He felt audiences wanted one iconic hero, not a buddy film. Stallone rewrote massive sections, cutting most dialogue and pushing the action spectacle. Cameron later joked that his version had more depth, while Stallone's was less politics, more explosions. That choice made the movie a box office juggernaut, but also shifted it into over-the-top fantasy. 2. Stallone nearly died in an explosion. During one of the jungle battle sequences, Stallone insisted on standing dangerously close to a wall of detonations for realism. The pyrotechnic charges misfired, going off seconds early and blasting debris inches from his face. Crew members dragged him clear, shaken that they had almost lost their star. Stallone's arm was bruised and burned, but he refused hospital treatment. Instead, he iced it down and returned to set. "The audience can smell fakes," he reportedly told the crew. The near miss terrified producers, but Stallone's obsession with authenticity kept pushing the envelope. For many, it confirmed that the line between acting and actual combat had blurred in First Blood Part 2. 3. The movie was filmed in Thailand, not Vietnam. Although set in Vietnam, the film was shot mostly in Thailand's steamy jungles. The production had to deal with monsoon rains, venomous snakes, and oppressive heat. Stallone reportedly dropped 20 pounds just sweating through his scenes in the dense humidity. Thai locals were hired as extras, playing both villagers and enemy soldiers, often under brutal conditions. To simulate Vietnam's war-torn villages, the crew constructed massive sets that had to be rebuilt multiple times after storms washed them away. The authenticity of the locations added grit, but behind the lens, the crew endured malaria scares, collapsing bridges, and constant logistical breakdowns. What audiences saw as Rambo's battlefield was, for the crew, a survival mission of its own. 4. The U.S. government got involved. This wasn't just a Hollywood action flick. It became entangled with Cold War politics. The Pentagon reportedly reviewed sections of the script and offered consultation, concerned about how American POWs and military policy were depicted. Stallone's rewrites leaned heavily into patriotic spectacle, aligning with the Reagan-era narrative of American strength. President Reagan himself later referenced Rambo in a speech saying, "I saw Rambo the other night. Now I know what to do the next time." It wasn't a joke. First Blood Part 2 had become propaganda fodder, a cinematic weapon shaping America's self-image in the 1980s. What audiences thought was just popcorn entertainment carried real-world political weight. 5. Stallone's paycheck was astronomical. By the mid-1980s, Stallone was one of the most bankable stars on the planet. For First Blood Part 2, he pocketed a staggering $12 million salary, a record-breaking paycheck at the time. To put it in perspective, that was more than the film's entire budget for special effects. Stallone's deal also gave him major creative control, allowing him to rewrite the script, approve casting choices, and shape the film's tone. Critics later argued this unchecked power led to an unbalanced movie. Breathtaking action but cartoonish storytelling. Still, Stallone's payday cemented him as one of Hollywood's highest-paid actors of the decade. And it set a precedent. By the late 80s, stars demanded control and money on a scale studios had never seen before. 6. Richard Crenna was a last-minute replacement colonel. Sam Trautman, Rambo's gruff mentor, was originally meant to be played by Kirk Douglas. Douglas even arrived on set, but within days he quit the film. He wanted Rambo to die at the end, mirroring the tragic tone of the first movie. Stallone and producers rejected this, insisting on a victorious finale. With Douglas gone, the production scrambled. Enter Richard Crenna, who had originated the role in the First Blood. He was flown into Thailand on short notice, sometimes working without fully memorized lines because pages were rewritten overnight. His grizzled, commanding presence grounded Stallone's fiery energy. Crenna's performance provided balance. Without him, the movie risked collapsing into pure chaos. The irony? His casting chaos became one of the smoothest elements on screen. 7. The explosive arrow was almost canceled. One of the most iconic visuals, Rambo firing explosive-tipped arrows, was not always part of the plan. Early drafts envisioned traditional firearms only. But Stallone pushed for something visually unforgettable, arguing, "Bullets are boring." We Need Shock's special effects teams designed miniature warheads that could detonate on impact, creating cinematic fireballs. The stunt, however, was terrifying to shoot. Arrows had to be wired with explosives, yet made safe for Stallone to handle. Misfires could have been fatal. Crew members stood behind blast shields during takes. When the final version lit up the screen, audiences roared. It wasn't just weaponry, it was myth-making. The explosive arrow became the symbol of 1980s action excess, a gimmick that could have blown up in a very different way. 8. Rambo's knife was a character itself. The oversized survival knife wasn't just a prop, it became one of the movie's most talked-about characters. Stallone worked with renowned knife maker Jimmy Lyle, nicknamed the Knife Maker to the Stars, to design the blade. Unlike the hunting knife from First Blood, this one was even bigger, featuring saw teeth and a hollow handle with survival tools. Stallone wanted the knife to look intimidating enough to be feared before it was even swung. On set, the blade was so sharp it reportedly sliced through props unintentionally. Crew members nicknamed it the Silent Villain. Merchandising soon exploded, with replicas sold worldwide to fans who wanted to own a piece of Rambo's power. What began as a tool for survival turned into a cultural icon all its own. 9. Julia Nixon faced hostility on set. Julia Nixon, cast as Kobau, Rambo's ally and brief love interest, endured significant challenges during filming. As a relative newcomer, she was stepping into a testosterone-fueled environment dominated by Stallone and military consultants. Some crew members doubted her ability to hold her own opposite Stallone. Worse, local extras reportedly mocked her accent during downtime. Stallone, however, defended her performance, often rehearsing scenes privately with her to ease the pressure. Nixon later revealed that she felt isolated but proud of her work, especially during emotional sequences like her character's tragic death. Though overshadowed by explosions, Kobau's brief appearance left a lasting mark. Her vulnerability gave Rambo a rare human connection. Behind the scenes, her struggle mirrored the film's broader theme: survival against overwhelming odds. 10. Stallone's workout routine was extreme. Stallone's physique in First Blood Part 2 became legendary, but it came at a brutal cost. Determined to look like a living weapon, he trained up to 4 hours daily, mixing weightlifting, boxing drills, and endless cardio under sweltering Thai heat. His diet was near starvation, oatmeal for breakfast, broiled chicken with salad for lunch, and little else. At one point, his body fat dropped below 3%, dangerously low for health. Crew members worried he'd collapse. Stallone later admitted the regimen made him irritable and constantly exhausted, but he insisted it was necessary. "You can't fake that kind of body," he explained. The result? A physique that defined 1980s action heroes. Go ahead and like and subscribe because the story only gets more explosive from here. 11. Vietnam veterans criticized the film. While First Blood Part 2 became a box office juggernaut, not all audiences embraced it. Many Vietnam veterans felt the film distorted their reality. Some argued it trivialized the war by turning it into comic book spectacle. Others resented the fantasy of one man rescuing POWs when, in reality, many vets were still battling bureaucracy, trauma, and neglect back home. The veterans of foreign wars publicly criticized the movie, calling it an insult to those who actually served. Stallone defended the film, saying it was a fantasy of justice for those who felt abandoned. Regardless, the backlash highlighted the gap between Hollywood storytelling and lived experience. What audiences cheered as thrilling escapism, many veterans saw as a painful distortion of a very real war. 12. The helicopter crash nearly halted production. A major sequence involving Soviet helicopters almost ended in real disaster. During filming, a stunt helicopter lost control while maneuvering near treetops. The pilot clipped a branch, causing the aircraft to spiral dangerously before regaining stability just seconds from crashing. Cast and crew scattered, convinced they were about to witness a fatal accident. The shaken pilot grounded the chopper for hours while mechanics inspected it. Insurance representatives threatened to shut the entire production down. Stallone reportedly argued fiercely to keep filming, believing the movie's credibility hinged on authentic aerial stunts. Safety protocols tightened afterward, but the incident left everyone rattled. On screen, the choppers looked like unstoppable machines. Off-screen, they were one miscalculation away from becoming coffins in the jungle sky. 13. Rambo's dialogue was cut to bare minimum. Early drafts of the script had Rambo speaking in long, brooding monologues about war and betrayal. Stallone slashed most of it. He argued that the character worked best as a man of action, not words. By the final cut, Rambo had only around 50 lines of dialogue across the entire film. This minimalism turned him into a mythic figure, a silent force of vengeance whose body language spoke louder than any speech. Crew members joked that Stallone acted with his muscles, not his mouth. Ironically, the lack of dialogue made Rambo more iconic. The less he said, the more audiences projected their own emotions onto him. Silence wasn't emptiness, it was power, and Stallone wielded it like a weapon. 14. Critics savaged it. Audiences didn't care upon release. In 1985, First Blood Part 2 was ripped apart by critics. Roger Ebert called it a cartoon masquerading as drama, while others dismissed it as jingoistic propaganda. Yet audiences poured into theaters, making it one of the highest-grossing films of the year. The disconnect was staggering. Critics saw trash. Fans saw catharsis. The film tapped into the 1980s zeitgeist of Cold War paranoia, giving Americans the fantasy of rewriting history with brute force. For many, it wasn't about accuracy. It was about reclaiming pride. The critical scorn barely mattered. The movie's $300 million worldwide box office proved it had captured something primal. Not truth, but spectacle. Not reality, but release. In the clash between critics and audiences, Rambo emerged victorious. 15. Stallone suffered real injuries. During filming behind Rambo's unstoppable image was Stallone's battered body. During one scene, he dove through a thatched hut as explosives detonated. Splinters tore into his leg, requiring stitches. In another, he waded through a swamp filled with leeches, emerging with infections that had to be treated with antibiotics. Crew members recalled him limping between takes, drenched in sweat and pain. Stallone shrugged it off, claiming audiences would feel the difference if he cheated the danger. His relentless push for realism left him scarred, literally. Years later, he admitted that the cumulative toll of the Rambo and Rocky films left him with permanent injuries. What fans saw as effortless heroism was, in reality, a brutal endurance test that nearly broke the man behind the myth. 16. The prison camp was built and burned. Twice. The massive POW camp set, complete with bamboo cages, guard towers, and muddy pits, was one of the film's biggest undertakings. Built deep in the Thai jungle, it took weeks of labor by local crews. Then disaster struck. A monsoon storm ripped through, flattening structures and washing away props. With shooting schedules already behind, producers ordered the camp rebuilt immediately. Just days after completion, controlled fire effects got out of hand, scorching large sections of the set. Panic rippled through the crew, but production pressed forward, repairing and filming simultaneously. On screen, the camp looks authentic, grim, and oppressive. What audiences didn't know was that it was itself a war zone, a fragile construction that had to survive both weather and fire before Rambo ever set foot inside. 17. The Soviet villain was played by an American. One of the film's most chilling characters, the ruthless Soviet officer Podovsky, wasn't played by a Russian at all. Instead, the role went to American actor Steven Berkoff, known for playing villains in Beverly Hills Cop and later Octopussy. The choice was deliberate. Stallone wanted a theatrical presence, someone who could sneer with operatic menace. Berkoff leaned into the role, delivering lines with icy precision, though his accent was often criticized as exaggerated. Behind the scenes, he clashed with Stallone over character motivation, wanting more depth than the script allowed. Stallone overruled him, insisting the villain should embody pure cruelty. The result? A performance that critics mocked as one-dimensional, but audiences instantly remembered. Podovsky wasn't real, but he was unforgettable, an enemy built entirely for cinematic revenge. SAR 18. The film sparked international protests. While American audiences cheered, First Blood Part 2 stirred outrage abroad. In the Philippines, veterans protested its portrayal of Asians as faceless enemies. In Russia, state media blasted it as anti-Soviet hysteria. Even in Thailand, where the film was shot, some locals complained about how villagers were depicted as helpless victims or traitorous collaborators. The controversy grew so intense that several countries temporarily banned the movie from theaters. Stallone dismissed the criticism, arguing that the film was entertainment, not a documentary. But the protests proved its cultural impact went far beyond Hollywood. What was intended as popcorn escapism became a flashpoint in global debates about war, propaganda, and America's image abroad. Rambo wasn't just a hero, he was a lightning rod for international tension. 19. Rambo's headband became a global fashion statement. That simple red bandana tied around Rambo's forehead became one of the most copied fashion accessories of the 1980s. Street vendors from New York to Tokyo sold knockoffs to kids who wanted to channel Stallone's warrior look. Even sports stars began wearing sweatbands in homage, turning the accessory into a symbol of toughness. What fans didn't know was that the headband was improvised. Stallone asked for it during filming to keep sweat from stinging his eyes in the jungle heat. The wardrobe team tied a strip of fabric around his head, and the look stuck. The practical fix became a pop culture icon. It wasn't just costume, it was myth. Rambo's headband said everything without words: pain, endurance, rebellion, survival. A strip of cloth turned into legend. 20. It almost had a very different ending. In one early draft, Rambo doesn't survive. The climax had him sacrificing himself to save POWs, dying in a hail of bullets. Stallone vetoed the idea, insisting the character needed to live for audiences to believe in redemption. Instead, The final version ends with Rambo walking away after a bitter speech about abandoned soldiers. That choice not only set up Rambo 3, but also transformed Rambo into a continuing franchise figure. Still, the alternate ending haunted some fans when details leaked. Imagine the cultural shift if Stallone had allowed his hero to die in 1985. Rambo might have remained a tragic icon instead of a never-ending symbol of indestructibility. One choice reshaped decades of sequels, merchandising, and global recognition. Survival wasn't just on-screen, it was narrative strategy. Bonus fact: a secret CIA screening. Perhaps the strangest twist in First Blood Part 2's legacy is that the film was reportedly screened privately for CIA officers shortly after its release. The agency, intrigued by its depiction of covert missions in Southeast Asia, wanted to assess its influence on public perception of the Vietnam War. According to insiders, some officers found the film laughably unrealistic, while others worried it might fuel conspiracy theories about abandoned POWs. The idea that an action blockbuster was dissected by America's intelligence community blurs the line between entertainment and propaganda. What began as Stallone's sequel became a subject of government analysis. Few Hollywood films have achieved that strange honor, being judged not just by audiences, but by spies measuring its impact on history itself. Rambo. First Blood. Part 2 wasn't just another action movie. It was sweat, fire, and blood spilled in the jungles of Thailand. It was politics disguised as spectacle, fantasy posing as justice, and myth forged from danger. Stallone's creation didn't just dominate theaters, it redefined what an action hero could be and what Hollywood dared to sell as victory. If you enjoyed uncovering these hidden stories, go ahead and like, subscribe, and comment with which fact shocked you most. And remember, sometimes the wildest battles aren't on the screen, but behind the camera.